views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. When it was completed in 1972, the Cross Bronx Expressway was held as an engineering marvel, the first highway ever built through a dense urban environment. It was expensive for the time, costing $40 million, and it was seen as a breakthrough linkage between Route 95 and the George Washington Bridge. But now, almost 50 years later, we know a lot better. The Cross Bronx Expressway is a disaster in every way, with traffic backups that span its length from morning, noon to night. It is a literal killer of Bronx lungs, spewing deadly exhaust to Bronx neighborhoods 24/7, 365 for every inch of its 6.5 miles. So other than cursing in frustration as we sit for hours in traffic, what, if anything, can be done about it? Tonight, we have three guests who have some ideas that, with the Biden administration support in Washington, they think they can finally see their way towards reality. So please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk the District Manager of Community Board 9, a co-founder of the Cross Bronx Initiative, William Rivera. Mr. Rivera, always nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Gary.
And a professor of health policy and management at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University. It is Professor Peter Alexander Meunnig. Mr. Meunnig, nice to have you with us, sir.
Nice to have you. Nice to be on the show.
Great, thank you. And also an assistant professor in landscape architecture at Cornell University is Professor Jennifer Birkeland. Professor, nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
I'm going to tell you something that when I realized it is actually incredible. The introduction that I just read to you, and we've been doing this program for 26 years. I've never done this before, is an actual word for word copy of the introduction I gave to the same program about the same subject 10 years ago. So it's complete. When I look back at the program, which we did on October 31st, 2011, and William was one of our guests, when I looked back at it, I watched it and I said, wait a minute, that's exactly the introduction I would read tonight. So that in itself tells you a little bit about the overwhelming long-term frustration that Bronxites have had with the Cross Bronx and certainly people in the entire region. So let's start with you, Mr. Rivera. Let's talk a little bit about the Cross Bronx Initiative, why it was founded 10 years ago, why you came on Bronx Talk 10 years ago, and where are we at now 10 years later with what I said, maybe a chance to get something done.
Yeah, I think we have some light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you, Gary, for having us and everyone on the panel. 2011, I became a board member for Bronx Community Board 9. I founded the Cross Bronx Express Initiative, which was really just a grassroots initiative, getting together with our local elected officials, stakeholders in the community, universities. I actually spoke at Peter's school, now that you mentioned it, one time in 2011. Cornell University now involved, NYU Polytech, Columbia University Civil Engineering, New York State DOT. So it's just a collaboration of private partnerships and public works to really find out what are some short and long-term solutions to this environmental injustice that we have in the Bronx that Robert Moses created. You're talking about over 100 and maybe more, over 200,000 vehicles a day, 116 a week. 116 hours of traffic congestion a week, or maybe even more. Those are estimated numbers. This is one of the most congested corridor in the United States of America, right here in our district in Bronx Avenue and Bruckner. And I'm just glad that now, fast forward 10 years later, we have new energetic leadership in the district. We have two new elected officials that are in Congress, and we're refocusing, and a lot has been done, and we'll talk about that later in the show, Gary.
I just want to underscore the numbers, some of the numbers that you mentioned, and the research is the same. There's no fooling. 175,000 vehicles traversing through the borough of the Bronx every day, and the estimation is that a quarter of them, do the math, tens of thousands of diesel trucks. Open air, it's spewing, as I mentioned earlier, diesel fumes into the the air throughout the business. Throughout the borough, Mr. Rivera, what are the biggest issues? We know that asthma and airborne issues come up with all of kids and others. What are the issues you think that need to be addressed? And then we'll look to the two professors for potential solutions.
There's a bunch of variables. In fact, there's one you just hit it right on the nail. The Bronx is choking. The Cross Bronx is choking the Bronx. There's probably a huge factor why we have one of the highest asthma rates all over the state and over the country. The traffic also hurts the economy, and the local communities are choking. I'm sure if you did some really good testing, air testing in the area, you're going to see there's really high admissions rates. Diesel fuel emissions is a carcinogen. It does cause cancer, and God knows what else is going on in terms of the underlying issues that we're not seeing now in terms of cancer and other health issues in the Cross Bronx. And the reality is it's a very challenging thing to tackle. It costs a lot of money to deck the Cross Bronx. It will cost a lot of money to have a tunnel. And these are all solutions we looked at. One easy solution maybe is to actually put filters on the diesel exhaust stacks on the trucks that trap those the particles that go into your lungs. That's why it's so harmful, the diesel emissions. And I'm sure the professionals could talk more about that. But yes, some short-term solutions is putting filters on diesel stacks, and some long-term solutions would be possibly a tunnel and decking the Cross Bronx.
The notion of capping it, which is the word that they've been using, of actually covering it, we're going to address with Professor Meunnig in a moment. I remember when you were on our show way back, you talked about how it affects businesses as well, with all the big trucks getting off because they want a shortcut, so they'll go through that very convoluted process of going through Hugh Grant Circle and then somehow getting back on. It's an absolute nightmare. Let's talk to you, Professor Meunnig, and let's address what the possibilities are for literally capping it or making it a tunnel or a series of tunnels. What do you think? What are the possibilities?
Yeah, so there's a lot of possibilities, sort of following up on where William started. There's a lot of PM 2.5 in the air. There's also a lot of noise pollution. So you can't hear yourself in a regular conversation if you're standing next to it. And that affects people's health as well. The PM 2.5 is like smoking 24/7 a day. And so the idea that we had was, first put the caps on there as quickly as possible. And what a cap is it is a decking over the expressway. And you can actually do this relatively inexpensively because there are many parts of the expressway that are below grade. So they're already dug out, and it's possible to pre-manufacture caps. So I'm working with our School of Architecture on and some material scientists and looking at how can you manufacture these things and put them over. And the idea is once you get those caps, you've put a cap on the noise and the pollution, and you can filter the air that's coming out with PM 2.5 filters. And what that will do is it'll just immediately reduce the rates of heart disease, asthma, cancer in the neighborhood. And it will also buy you time to work with the communities to think about what this is going to look like after the caps are on, such that, the communities can sort of plan, what kind of green space they're going to put there, how it's going to integrate with the community and things like that. That's a process that takes a lot of time.
Well, that's funny because, my first thought was when you said, well, it can be done in relatively quickly or simply. I can't even imagine it from an engineering perspective. And then you say, which is really very sad, the most difficult part would be what to put on top of it. I wish it was, I don't want to say I wish it was the other way around, but that is rather ironic. I just want to re-ask that, though. Can it really be done? I mean, it seems so futuristic. You say relatively simply. Of course, the funding we'll get back to Mr. Rivera about, but it really can be done. We can do this.
Yeah, we can do it. And we can do it while saving money at the same time, because this will reduce medical costs. It will increase the value of real estate in the neighborhood, but the medical costs are the big driver of the cost of this project. So once you get that out of the equation, the investment has a return on it. It's like investing in a mutual fund that's going to pay you dividends, And so, so the idea is, you build these caps and you can actually just move them right over the expressway and join them together, sometimes with some composite materials that are lighter weight than have traditionally been used.
Wow. And would this be for the entire 6.5 mile length or for certain sections?
No, you can only really do that in the sections that are below grade, and that's only about 2 miles of the expressway.
Right.
The rest you have to build up and over. Which
would be the section, frankly, that's in Community Board 9, where William's neighborhood is. One of the things I do want to mention, there was a study done a little while ago, and I remember when it came out, and they studied intersections throughout, interchanges actually between roadways throughout the country, and they found that interchange, and I'm smiling because I've only been over it 40 million times, but that takes from the Cross Bronx to the Bronx River Parkway is just an absolute disaster in both directions. And that was voted one of the worst. And the other thing, which I didn't realize, but I saw it in, I believe in William's materials that he had circulated about this issue, is the 2 parks that are right there at that intersection. Imagine playing basketball or bringing your kids to go on the swings, and even just to have a day of fresh air, you're right next to the worst highway in America. It's like, it's just, anti-human, so to speak. All right, let's bring Professor Birkeland into the conversation. Nice to have you with us. Talk to me a little bit about why you got involved, why you thought this was good for your architectural students, and what they ultimately turned out. And we're just going to show a sample of the kind of design they're working with.
This was, I think, really exciting for me personally, because I live in Brooklyn and I'm very familiar with New York and traveling back and forth between here and Ithaca. But I think, one of the reasons it was so exciting for students really is because of the complexity, I think, of the Bronx, and in so many sort of different ways in which I think a lot of cities and neighborhoods traditionally have sort of felt similar sort of social and environmental injustices and continue to do so with highways and infrastructure. So the students essentially have been focusing on the neighborhoods this semester and really looking much more contextually at the sort of urban fabric and sort of the issues, as well as sort of the destinations and the people that live here, from a sort of like mass data sort of set. And really they've been drilling down into, if this were to be capped, to Peter's point, what essentially would be the fabric or the landscape or the sort of programming that would go on top of it that could support the community, the communities that are there today, into the future. So they've been looking a lot at restoring ecological habitat, waterways, urban agriculture, cultural centers, or just sort of noticing and sort of mapping and evaluating all of the existing lack of services, and really wanting to use the cap as a way to start to bring the neighborhoods together.
Yeah, I don't want to ask you to give your students a grade here.
Oh, interesting.
But as you evaluated some of the things that they turned out, did you think these were reasonable? That these were doable? I mean, we want to deal in reality. I mean, the ideas
agreed.
Are great, but yes,
ideas are great, and I always push my students to think big, because I have 10 years of professional experience working in Philadelphia and New York, and Los Angeles, and I think that when you're engaging with the community, you want to bring that expertise and you want to bring that imagination to the communities, really, to then get the response. So I think as designers, it's our job to really sort of think large and then figure out how that sort of what that response is. So I think it's really a conversation.
We've got a photograph actually that was taken by our friend Joe Raskin of Wandering New York of the interchange at 176th Street. And anybody who knows it knows it's a disaster. So we're going to show you that. And then I want to show, now these were students, Marin Johnson and Brandon Wilson, who worked together. And they put this, and when I'm going to show it, people are going to go, wait a minute, we're going to transform what we just saw to this green? I mean, we want people to visualize and think big. This would be, one look at it. And then in detail, people can look at some of the streets there and say, wow, look at this. This would be a new look for the Cross Bronx with greenery and all this other stuff. Do you expect that there will be more of these ideas, or will you present these, or is this simply an educational project that is good, but
No.
we're going to move it forward?
So the Landscape Architecture Foundation, which is a national organization, actually is having a call this year in combination with the Green New Deal, asking all of the universities to submit proposals for projects across the country that think sort of fall under the sort of charge of the Green New Deal. So I thought that this was a really sort of wonderful example of something that could go forward and be done. And that will actually be, there will be a symposium at the University of Pennsylvania in September, and the students' work will be shown and talked about then. So that is one avenue that I've been sort of pushing the work down. But of course, in connecting with William, and actually quite a few other opportunities have opened up as well. So
the time is now in the Bronx, and as we know that we've been talking about this for decades.
Mm-hmm.
As I said on this program, it's only been 10 years. Mr. Rivera, let's talk a little bit about funding. I know that there are state officials who are interested in this and ready to partner, but the real money has got to come from the federal government. Talk to me about what the hopes are now with President Biden and the infrastructure plan, as well as Senator Schumer, who is now the majority leader in the Senate.
Yes, pretty much quickly, our next steps in a nutshell is getting funding really for a committee and a planning and vision committee, really getting together and focusing on some of these short and long-term solutions, having a committee together. Hopefully we're having conversations with New York State DOT, who is the landlord of the Cross Bronx right now, New York State Department of Transportation, New York City Department of Transportation, universities such as Peters University, Jennifer University, really getting together grassroots stakeholders, community stakeholders, and coming up with plans to have a ready-to-go project. So when funding comes down the line, like the Tappan Zee Bridge or the Big Dig or the Seattle Way Viaduct, and we could go on and all these projects, the Cross Bronx is on the radar. The Cross Bronx has not been on the radar. Fortunately, now we have support. We have Congressman Richie Torres, who wrote a letter to the federal government saying the Cross Bronx should be on the map. Assemblyman Carinas Reyes wrote a letter to the federal government saying the Cross Bronx should be on the map with this funding. AOC's office is involved. We have community stakeholders like Milka Martell. We have a lot of leaders in the community really stepping up to plate and saying, hey, the Cross Bronx needs to be looked at. President Biden has a huge, ambitious transportation infrastructure plan, and the Cross Bronx has to be part of that map. And I think it should be part of the map. And then the first step again, getting this committee like they did with the Sheridan Expressway. The Sheridan Expressway was a successful project that was modified into a boulevard. And that was started by a planning committee that I was on as well as a community board years ago. So I think getting a couple of $1 million to get together the committee, hopefully conversations with state DOT to take that lead, to have professional planners, engineers get together and say, what are we going to do on the Cross Bronx? Get all this data analysis, really take a look and come up with proposals and how much it would have cost. And then we get traction on getting that funding from there.
We do have the letter, a copy of the letter that Congressman Torres sent to the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. One of the things that he mentioned, and I'll just read it to you, I'm writing to secure from the Biden administration a clear and concrete, ironic use of the word concrete, commitment to reimagining the Cross Bronx Expressway for the 21st century and building the Bronx back better and greener than ever before. The Bronx deserves nothing less than its fair share of the America Jobs Plan. So let's turn to you, Professor Meunnig, and ask you, is there a relationship? I know that some other highways have been capped in other cities, and Mr. Rivera mentioned Seattle, Philadelphia has had them. Is this a unique concept and a unique problem, or is this the kind of thing that other cities in America and maybe even across the world have had to deal with?
It's quite common. They range in scope and scale. Seattle has a freeway park. Dallas has a similar project. And of course, there's some notorious ones like the Big Dig in Boston. This is much simpler. in the sense that, that much of what needs to be done was done by accident when the freeway was put in, so it is below grade. It's smaller in scope than what Chile did. Chile actually buried all their freeways under their city because their air pollution was so bad, and the noise problem was so bad that they successfully did that. And if you look at these projects after they're completed, it's like night and day. Before you have these big noisy freeways and air pollution, and afterwards you just have these beautiful parks and green space and people walking around, and you wouldn't know that there's cars passing under you.
Cost, now I know that Mr. Rivera said, and we all agree things will have to be evaluated. Cost and time, how long, Bronxites will say, well, wait a minute, you're going to do this. It'll take another 10, 20 years, by the time they get everybody together on the same page and then get the funding and put a shovel in the ground, it takes forever. Is this possible to do? And then do you have an estimation in your mind and say, if we could get X amount of money, we could do this?
Yeah. So that, going the traditional route of, pouring concrete and having people draft up plans and community board approval and all that stuff, it is very time consuming. And I've spoken with developers that have put dollar estimates on it in the billions. We estimated that it could be done for 1 billion, but just the parts that are, below grade. And the reason is because everything's in place. There's a nice space between the access road and the expressway, to put supports. So it's actually very technically simple to do. And with modern composites and manufacturing processes, you can make the caps offsite and bring them in. And, in New York, everything takes time and there's lots of labor costs and stuff. So to the extent that you can reduce that by pre-making everything in a factory, bringing it in, laying it down, you can do it without even really that much disruption to the traffic on the expressway.
Professor Birkeland, you said that you had split the projects up into sections. And we heard from Professor Meunnig that, only 2 miles of it, about a third of it is below street level. So that kind of makes it easier. You just put a, kind of a roof over there.
Yep.
It is the process of looking at this highway going to have to be piecemeal? Like you're going to say, well, we'll do this section this way.
Definitely.
This section. It is.
Absolutely.
And why is that? And what comprises those sections and the considerations in each?
I mean, I think to Peter's point, even if there was a sort of module-based system, really, you would only be able to sort of approach it, I think, a section at a time would be my sort of reading of it. But I think ultimately and contextually with the neighborhoods, it is going to be a little bit traumatic, I think, going in, bringing the contractors in and all of that, and it's obviously going to do something to the highway itself. So I think in terms of the planning and phasing of all of that, just going in, not necessarily like, boom, it's all done. I don't think that that's necessarily realistic, but I think that there should be an evaluation process just in terms of like, what are the easiest parts to sort of start with? Where can we learn the most from? And then moving on from there, that'll only make the process much more easier, I think, in setting that up.
Some of the dialogue here has me thinking, well, okay, you talk about, and some of the things Professor Meunnig said, well, it can be done. It can be done relatively simply. I'm just thinking about the people who've been most affected, which of course are the people right next to it are going to say, oh, really? Another construction project? Yeah. So, I don't know, I guess go back to you, Professor Meunnig, years? I mean, is there any way to know, or we're in a new territory here, so who knows what can happen?
Yeah, well, the people we talked to in Parkchester were certainly open to the idea of getting rid of that noise and pollution, even if it required, a little bit of shorter term pain. Yeah, I mean, one of the lessons that we should learn from Robert Moses himself is that if you have everything planned out before the funding comes in, that you're going to be able to get this done much more effectively. And that was his big strength, is that he just nerded out and drew everything up before the money was there. And then when the money came, he was able to do all this stuff. So we should learn from that playbook, I think. And on our end, I'm working with GSAP, the Graduate School of Architecture at Columbia, and we're running a studio on this. And the idea is, well, hopefully we can get some stuff drafted up so that we can hit the road running. So I think
when the money comes in, you're kind of ready to roll it out, so to speak.
Yeah, I think we're looking at a few years, not decades.
Well, that would really be an eye opener for a lot of people in the Bronx. Mr. Rivera, there is a press conference. Now we're shooting this on Thursday. There's a press conference tomorrow, and then of course our program begins airing on Monday night. So that's just the time frame of this. What do you see really as the very next steps? Obviously there's got to be lobbying going on in Washington. It could even be in person, whether you or others may have to get down there, and whether they meet with the president or Secretary Buttigieg, whatever it takes to get that funding. I realize that, but what do you see from the Bronx perspective as the next steps? You talked about a task force. Paint what your agenda is going to be.
My agenda is going to keep the foot on the gas and put the pressure on our local
I knew that. I know who I'm dealing with.
and our local elected officials are on board, and they're putting the pressure as well. It's a great first step for our elected officials to write letters directly to the federal government transportation secretary and the president. The press conference will be at the intersection of the Cross Bronx and Virginia Avenue, right in Parkchester. This is just more than a press conference. It's a start to the future of the Cross Bronx. I don't think we had this type of press conference there. I'm very excited. I'm very happy for the elected officials, and especially Congressmember Richie Torres. This is an area that we're able to secure our community board $10 million to renovate that Virginia Park and Hugh Grant Circle on a Parks of Our Borders program. Right over the Cross Bronx's park will be renovated. Perfect spot to start decapping and decking that Peter was talking about, Professor Peter. That's low grade. And those numbers sound great. $1 billion for that area. NYU Polytech did a study, graduates, they dedicated their whole graduate class, civil engineering, on this. And they talked about, at this time, 8 years ago, about $1 billion a mile for a tunnel and for rail. And this could be something bigger than just capping the Cross Bronx and controlling pollution and traffic. This is a huge jobs workforce program. The jobs that could be created on decking the Cross Bronx and potentially
we didn't talk about that. That's very big. Yeah.
This is something very big in terms of the Green Deal. And I think this is something probably mentioned and something Richie Torres was going to, because he did mention Green Deals and job program. So yes, this is bigger than just fixing this environmental injustice. This is a future project that could really put the Bronx back on the map and have a showcase project.
I think it's transformative, not only for the highway and the local neighborhoods, but it's a statement about the Bronx, for the Bronx, that this is how we're going to go into the future. I got to do something fun, which I don't know if you remember, William, when you were on the show 10 years ago and we talked about it, you gave me this T-shirt.
Oh, wow. Gary.
Which says the Cross Bronx Study. And I have worn this. People have seen me. And I was in Florida a couple of weeks ago, and I was wearing this T-shirt. Somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "How do you know about the Cross Bronx?" I said, "Don't even start me." I'm still sitting in traffic. But anyway, I just want to show you, I still have the shirt. I still wear it proudly, and I appreciate that. And maybe one day I'll wear it.
We got to make some more for the new team.
That's it. When we put the first shovel in the ground, I'll come out there wearing my T-shirt. Anyway, Professor Birkeland from Cornell University, thank you so much. Thank you for having your students take a look at our borough. We want them here. We want them to do more and more and more. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Professor Meunnig, and your work from Columbia University, and William Rivera from Community Board 9. Thank you. If we get together, the president has said it, there's nothing we can't do if we work together. Thanks to our great producers, Rebecca and Stephen. And guess what? We'll see you next week. We'll do another show. Good night.